So today we're going to talk about one of the bad boys of Easter, and we call him a bad boy, and because you'll see why. He was naughty guy. Raise your hand if you are in this place and you have ever bargained with God. Bargained. We all do. You say, God, if you will, then I will. We've all bargained with God. We bargain with our prayers. We say, well, God, if I promise to pray, an extra 5 minutes in the morning. Or God, if you would, that I promise. Pastor Javier keeps talking about attending a whole series. I usually come every other Sunday or every 2 Sundays. I'm going to come for a whole series. If you, God, would please do such and such in the life of my husband that doesn't pick up his socks. Or we bargain with God by saying, with our giving, God, I'll give more. I promise I'll attend more. I'll serve more. God, if that person, you don't want me hanging out with that person, I will walk away. I will break up. God, but if you would just only, and we try to bargain with God with our obedience and our giving and our prayer life. And we all try to get God in on our thing. And there's something in us that wants to leverage God's power for our ends. We all want to leverage God's ability because God is a supernatural God. And we believe he's like a genie, right? Where we could somehow harness his genie ability and supernatural ability to do things in our life that we can probably not do on our own. Or maybe for you, it's something that happened in the past. Maybe you don't bargain with God, but at some point you bargained with God and then things didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out. So your position is, since you didn't, then I won't. Since you didn't come through the way I thought you were going to come through in that situation, that I'm just not going to live the way I think I should live because of you. I'm not going to respond to you because you didn't respond to me. And we all live in that tension of prayer and wanting God to answer something and trying to manipulate God and find a way to bend God manipulate God to do the things that we want. I think a good majority of us at some point has prayed to win the lottery or to win some kind of prize, right? Or win that vacation or win that female or that man that you so much like. But if God had behaved the way you thought God ought to behave, then you would have responded and acted in an appropriate way. But then since he did it, you won't. And today's character is one that we're going to all be able to relate with to some capacity, because although we don't have a lot of context for a story, we have bits and pieces of information. I think there's a little bit of him in all of us. And so today's character was a pretender or a thief, and he wasn't necessarily a thief in the way we think of that. Maybe more of a better description would be a con artist. His side was the side where he could profit. There was a right side, the way of doing things, the wrong way, and then his way. And his way usually involved him coming out on top. And when there was something in it for him, he followed Jesus. And when he realized there was nothing in it for him to follow God or follow Jesus, then he bailed. When it became apparent that there was more to gain with the people that were against Jesus, that he decided to go on that team. His loyalty was singular, and his name was Judas. Judas. Raise your hand if you've ever heard the name Judas. Yeah, we've all, or a majority of us have, if you grew up in church. Now, if you're not a Christian or starting your journey of faith and this is all new to you, this is an interesting character. And you'll hear him often in the narrative of Easter, and we'll talk a little bit about him next week. But Judas' story is relevant to us because there's something in all of us that wants to leverage God and his power for our ends. When he is no longer willing to work for us the way we think, sometimes we just decide not to continue to pursue him or follow him. And when we realize that God won't bargain or barter, then we bail. And so we've all, again, tried to barter with God or try to bargain with him. If you will, God, get her for me, then I will do this. If you get me that job, then I promise to. If you heal me, then I will. And this is all us trying to manipulate God to do our will. And this was my personal favorite, God, if you don't let my parents find out, then I promise that I will never do that again till next Saturday. Right. My parents aren't here, so I can say that. And there's a story in the New Testament about a rich young ruler that came to Jesus and said, Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, well, you know, follow the commandments. And he's like, well, I've kept all of the commandments. I've done that, right, since I was a little boy. And Jesus was probably like, you know what, nobody's ever kept all the commandments. I'm Jesus, I should know, right? But okay, since you're a rich young ruler, then go ahead and sell all of your possessions and follow me. Sell all your possessions. And then he kind of looked at his bank account on his app and realized that he was very wealthy and what that meant. And it meant that he would have to give away all of his money and follow Jesus. And Jesus didn't really have a place to lay his head. You know, the Son of Man did not have a place to call his own. He didn't have his own apartment or his own complex. He didn't know where they were going to spend the next night or get their next meal from. And there was security that this rich young ruler had, that leaving that for Jesus would cause him to live in this state of dependence. And he was not ready for that. And the Bible says that he walked away from Jesus sad because he had great wealth. And he walked away when he realized that he was not going to be able to get from Jesus what he thought he would need from Jesus. Some of you have walked away from God because he didn't keep his end of the bargain, and that bargain was the one, that deal was the one he never agreed to. Some of you have walked away in spite of the fact that he maintained his end of the deal, but it just wasn't enough for you. Like you got the job, but once you got the job that you prayed for, you realize, I wish I could just make more money, right? Or I got the job that I wanted, but then the people that are in that job are just not the people that I like. And so I thank you, God, that you got me the job that I prayed for, but now that I'm in the job, I just kind of see things that I don't want. And sometimes God will just let you have what you pray for. He really will. But as Judas learned, God does not bargain. He can't be suckered into our schemes. And you should be happy that you can't manipulate God. And as I thought about this yesterday and today, and as I was thinking of such a big God, I'm happy that I can't con God into doing my bidding. Because if I could, then I would just be a mess, because I would get everything that I want because I'm a manipulator, like we all can be. And we have no bargaining power with God because we really have nothing that he needs. Did you know that? That there's nothing that you have that God really, really needs to be God. He is God with or without you. He is God all by himself. He'll exist. He existed before you. He'll exist after you. And that's a sobering thought. The thought that there's a great big God, that there is nothing that we can give him that will manipulate him to do our bidding. That is a great big thought. And that is something that should sober us. But for Judas, Jesus was always a means to an end. The question that he asked was, what's in it for me? But Jesus wasn't alone. At some point in the Bible, we find the 12 arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They're asking, well, what's going to be in it for me? Who's going to say, at your right, Jesus? And who's going to say, at your left? They wanted something too. Matthew 19:27 records this. The disciples talking, we have left everything to follow you. What then would there be for us? But as we later learned, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, they walked away from Jesus. Jesus didn't throw them out, they walked away. They walked away when they realized that things weren't going to happen the way they thought it was going to happen. They were all expecting a king, a Messiah, to go ahead and get them out of the control of Rome, because they were under the control of Rome, and they wanted Israel back to where it was when David and Solomon were king, at the top, under nobody's control, under nobody's authority, right? Like the other disciples, Judas had a picture of how this whole thing was going to happen when he decided to follow Jesus. He thought, man, he had an Old Testament view or mentality of what was going to happen. There was two things that were clear. The God would send a Messiah, a king, and he would reestablish his kingdom as in the days of David and Solomon. And the Messiah was going to be a reigning king. And Judas had that, and obviously the thought was that, well, if we are with you as you ascend to power, right, if we are rolling with you as you become king, you know, if we get to be part of the building process, if I'm with you from the beginning, right? Once you get to your kingdom, then I will ascend also with you. So there was something to be gained in the mind of some of the disciples by following Jesus. Jesus was obviously a man from God. right? He seemed to fit a lot of the Old Testament pictures of what the Messiah would be, the descriptions of a coming king, but there was a few notable exceptions. He seemed a little too passive sometimes. If he was going to be a king to overthrow Rome and come out of the bondage of Roman rule, then he couldn't be as passive as he was. He was a little too loving. He was a little bit too gentle sometimes. And sometimes he would go into the temple and bring out the whips and take care of those people, right? But there was something a little bit different. He wouldn't get organized and assign positions. He wouldn't say, okay, you're going to be the second in charge, and you're going to be the third, and you're going to be in charge of that. No, he didn't assign any positions. He wouldn't cooperate with the Jewish leaders, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He wouldn't cooperate with them. If you were going to get a kingdom together, you were going to overthrow Rome, you had to get everybody in Israel and the surrounding areas to become one group. And he wasn't that concerned about getting everybody to agree with him. He wasn't concerned about having a war chest. He paid taxes to Rome. He was a little too friendly to Rome. You thought if you were going to overthrow Rome, I'll start by not giving you any money, but not Jesus. But the tipping point for Judas was an extraordinary show of generosity by Jesus. And we'll come back to this in just a second. Judas assumed that Jesus was just waiting for the right time. And Judas thought, well, if I wait till the right time, that this 3-year investment that I've spent following Jesus, like us, right? We make an investment in following Jesus. We decide some things we're going to say no to because we're following Jesus. Every time you decide to follow something, you leave something behind. You know that, right? And every time you unfollow something, whether you know what you're unfollowing to, you're always unfollowing to something else. So always be cautious when you decide to unfollow what you're following when you decide to unfollow. But all of us, we decide to follow Jesus, and as a result, there's some things we have to give up because there is a moral code to following Jesus. There's the code of love. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And as you love other people, you have to say no to you, right? So in following Jesus, you're saying no to selfishness, and you're saying no to yourself. That's foundational to our faith. But Judas assumed that Jesus was just waiting for the right time. Jesus, after all, identified as a king. Jesus didn't deny that he was a king. He didn't deny that he was in the line of David. Eventually, as the theory went, like I explained earlier, if I follow Jesus now, when it's time, I will ascend with him. But when Judas finally realized that Jesus was not going to be cooperative, when he saw this 3-year investment not producing, he decided to flip sides, to switch teams. He went to the dark side of the force. Sometimes we're on the verge, you and I, we're on the verge of God doing something in our life, but we quit. Sometimes we've been believing and trusting God for a change in our life, for a change in one of our families. We've been invested in this thing. We're coming to church and we're bringing our kids up in the faith. And then all of a sudden our kids start acting a little bit silly and a little bit crazy. We don't know where that's coming from. We feel like we're doing all the right things, right? We're giving the way we're supposed to give. We're attending the way we're supposed to attend. We're loving the way we're supposed to love. And things aren't panning out the way we thought they were supposed to pan out. I've been coming to church and now I'm having even more fights with my husband or my wife. I've been attending church and I'm even having more financial problems. What's this? I've been coming to church and trying to do the God thing, and all of a sudden I'm anxious and I'm scared and I'm frightened and I have all these things going on that you would think coming to church would fix. And Judas, in the same way, he was following Jesus. It wasn't turning out the way he thought in his mind it was going to turn out. He couldn't manipulate God into doing what he wanted. God had a plan. And Judas just had to get in line. But Judas couldn't. And we'll see here in a second why he couldn't. In Matthew 26, verse 6, we see the breaking point for Judas. And we've heard this story, and I'll read it very quickly. When Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, okay, and that's indicative of Jesus. He hung out with the marginalized, right? He was at the house of a leopard, and we're supposed to know who this Peter is. We don't know, but apparently the people that they were writing to knew who this was. That's like me saying we all went to Larry's house, or we all went to, Tony's house. And verse 7 says, a woman with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar full of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. And one of the things you need to know about this alabaster bottle was that they were sealed at the top so the perfume would not evaporate. So if you wanted to open it, you had to break the neck of the bottle. And then what most people would do, they would pour the big bottle into small little bottles and sell those, right? But she didn't do that. She poured it all over Jesus' hair. Can you imagine the picture? When the disciple, verse 8, when the disciples saw this, they were indignant. And they were like, why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. If Jesus wasn't even, if Jesus was going to waste money, he was never going to get enough money together to overthrow Rome. You need money to overthrow Rome. Aware of this, Jesus said, and I find that funny, because whenever you read the Gospels, you see that Jesus was always aware. He knew the thoughts of the people in the room. So if I'm following Jesus for 3 years and I've seen the miracles, this is right after he raised Lazarus from the dead. Like I already know Jesus got some supernatural abilities. I'm very careful about what I'm thinking in his presence. If I'm scheming something, I'm just going to make sure I scheme outside the room. And then when I come in, clear my mind, right? So aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. And then they were like, wait a minute. What you mean we ain't going to have you? What are you talking about? Where are you going? Because where you going, we got to go. What you mean we're going to have you? You and I, we were supposed to be together, right? We're your disciples. We're the 12. Where you go, we go. Huh? What do you mean we're not going to have you too much longer? Where are you going? Verse 12. When she poured this perfume on my body, this is Jesus speaking, she did it to prepare me for burial. What? What do you mean? You can't die? Messiahs don't die? How is this possible? I tell you, wherever, in this next sentence, listen, if you're a skeptic or a believer, you should use this next piece of Scripture to rethink Jesus. If you've had your doubts, this is something you should look at, because look what he says here in verse 13. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel or this message, just good news, is preached throughout the world. Well, how did he know this would be throughout the world? Here we are in Florida in the United States, and we are recounting the story of this woman. Jesus predicted this so many years ago. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. How many of y'all heard this story before you came here today? Raise your hand. A good amount of us, right? Jesus knew that this would happen. He saw past them. He knew that this message would reach the ends of the world. They couldn't fathom that. The disciples couldn't fathom that. They couldn't understand that. They were just in the room with Jesus trying to understand what was happening. And here he's talking about he's going to die, and what she just did is going to be told all over the world. What do you mean all over the world? Like all over Israel, the world? No, all over the world. John gives us a little bit more detail in his account of what happened, because you know the Bible is the first 4 books or accounts of the New Testament. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are 4 accounts of Jesus' life by the vantage point of 4 different people. So John had a different look. He jotted something down a little different than Matthew did. Gives us a little bit more detail. In verse 4 he says, but one of the disciples, Judas, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was a year's wage, a year's worth of money. Now think about your salary, your yearly income. Even if you divide that by half, that was some expensive perfume. Verse 6, he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As the keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. So we get a detail that Judas, every once in a while, when he wanted to buy, a little something on the side, he would dip in the hand and get him some fish and some bread and some wine, or whatever else he needed, right? And ask, what are you willing to give? Then one of the 12, the one they called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest. So he realized, look, Jesus is not going to try to organize. He's not trying to save any money. So I'm just going to go and do what I think is best. I'm going to go to the officials that are trying to find Jesus, because he's been causing an uproar in the city, because he goes and calls the leadership hypocrites. He calls them liars. He calls them brood of vipers. He calls them snakes. He calls them thieves, right? So Jesus is not on good terms with the people that led the country at the time. So they were looking for a time to arrest them and to kill him. But they couldn't because the people were on Jesus' side. Wherever Jesus went, there was a group of people. So they knew that if they tried to arrest Jesus, then the people would get angry and they would have riots in the streets. They didn't want to do that. So here is Judas. And he goes to the chief priest and he says, hey, what are you willing to give me? What's in it for me? What can I have if I deliver him to you? So they counted out 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Now, I've worked with silver and gold for a while. 30 pieces of silver is not a lot. I mean, it's not a lot now. It wasn't a lot then. But thinking about trading in the thing that you value most for 30 pieces of silver. We do that all the time. We don't do it for silver or for gold, but we do it for different reasons. We do it for momentary peace. We do it for momentary satisfaction. We do it for a momentary fill. We do it for the thing in the moment that eases our pain. We trade Jesus for the thing in the moment that we think is going to sustain us, to hold us, to keep us from drowning. We do that all the time, not for silver, but we do it for other things. My question today is, what are you trading your relationship with God through Jesus for? Is it to keep your lifestyle, to keep things in order the way they need to be kept in order? We don't know if Judas had given up Jesus and was trying to just cut his losses, or he was trying to hurry up and speed up Jesus. Maybe he thought, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Judas thought, if I turn him in, then he'll be like, Superman, here I am, right? Maybe maybe he just needs a little nudge, Quincy. Maybe he just needs a little push. And if I turn him over, surely he's not going to let him, handcuff him, put him in jail, and all of those things not going to happen. And Judas thought there's no way that they're going to kill him because they're not going to get the Romans involved. The priests, they handle themselves. Maybe he'll get a flogging, get put in jail for a little while. They never thought it would escalate. So imagine this drama, though. They're gathered for the Last Supper. Y'all have a picture in your mind of what that looks like. Jesus does the unthinkable. Right before the Last Supper, he takes off his robe, he straps on a towel, he begins to serve them and wash their feet. They're like, whoa, you're not washing our feet? That's something that slaves do. That's something that the workers do. But then Jesus was like, if you don't let me wash your feet, if you don't let me serve you, you can have no part with me. So they were like, okay, wash our feet. We want to roll with you. Then Jesus does that, and then Judas discovers in the conversation that after they have dinner, they're going to go to the garden to pray, and he thought that's the perfect time. It's late at night. There's not going to be no guards around. People are sleeping. This is the perfect time for me to go tell the chief priest that, hey, this is where Jesus is going to be, and I can deliver him, get my money, and be done. But somehow, he had to get out of there, right? Before Jesus knew that he was gone, and he didn't give a hint of who he was. And while he was still trying to figure out a way in his mind that he was going to be able to do all this, Jesus, having Jesus' powers, does this. In John, verse 13, verse 21, he says, very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. Like, you should have known that. You've been with him for 3 years. You know he knows what you're thinking, what you're going to do, like my man. I don't think Judas was very bright. Or maybe he just wasn't mean-spirited. Maybe he just, I don't know. But he was busted. Peter could finally use that sword he'd been carrying around. That's the guy. Get him, Peter. No. And Jesus says to Judas, what you are about to do, do it quickly. Go. What you're about to do it quickly. Yes, now. I'm not going to stop you. I'm going to let you do what you want to do. That should scare us, right? Verse 28. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. He didn't tell them. Then he says the strangest thing. He says, when he was gone, verse 31, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. In other words, all is going as planned. All is going as I intended. Nothing has changed. He's tried to manipulate the story. Nothing has changed. He tried to push things to hurry up. No, nothing has changed. Here I am. God's plan is still in order. Nothing has changed, even though he's still scheming and trying. Matthew verse 27:3 says, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse. All of a sudden, he realized, wait a minute, Rome, they're gonna give him to Pilate. Now Rome is involved. Now it's not just the flogging in jail. Now they're talking about crucifying him. And all of a sudden, he felt all the remorse because he realized what he had given up for a momentary 30 pieces of silver. All of a sudden, he realized, and that happens to us all the time, we come to a moment of clarity where we realize what we're giving up. All of a sudden, in the moment, it just feels that that thing is satisfying us and that thing is giving us what we need. But when we back up and we realize all of a sudden, I'm trading this. I'm giving Jesus up for this. There's one more story in the Old Testament. There's a few of something similar happening, of a guy trading in his birthright, which meant more money, which meant power, for a bowl of soup. But when you're hungry, when your appetites are out of control, you're willing to give up anything to satisfy your appetite. But let me tell you something about an appetite. An appetite is never fully and finally satisfied. The more you feed an appetite, the bigger an appetite will get. And sometimes our appetites are so big for whatever it is in your particular life that it blinds us to how important and how meaningful a relationship with God is. So we give up. And we let our appetites rule. And we let our desire for the moment be bigger than that thing that's more important. I always like to use this example, and I've used it since I was a kid. Lewis, would you come for a second? Pretend this iPad is our appetite. And it gets bigger and bigger as you feed it. And all of a sudden we're living life, and Lewis is living life, and all he can see is his appetite. Because it's so close to him, because he's feeding it continually, and it's growing to the point where now all he sees is his appetite. His appetite for success, his appetite for peace, his appetite for security, his appetite for progress, his appetite for financial security, his appetite for growth in ministry, things that are not necessarily all bad, but when you continue to feed your appetite at the expense of a relationship with God, there is something wrong. So we want great marriages, but we want them apart from God, so we'll work really hard for Sunday to be our fun day and spend the time with our significant other, but we exclude God out of the picture. And we keep doing things and making this appetite. Now the appetite is big, and that's all we could see. Lewis, can you see Joel and Josh back there? You cannot. But then something happens in all of our lives. It happens usually on a Sunday morning, or it happens before small group or during small group. Or maybe you got some quiet, you had some plans and the plans canceled, and now you're at home, you have some time to be quiet, and all of a sudden you think God. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I keep getting that nudge. And all of a sudden you take a step back, Lewis. And the appetite is still the same size, but now he has a better perspective on the size of the appetite. And he decides to take another step back, and now the appetite is even smaller, because as he unfollows his appetite, he is beginning to follow something else. Because it happens to all of us. As we unfollow something, consequently, we're going to follow something else. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you go all the way up. I got you. But he takes one more step back. And now the appetite, it's the right size. It's the size that it's meant to be. He can see Jesus on the other end. He can see how important those decisions that he's making in the moment, how they're going to impact his future. But he can't do that when the appetite is all in his face, because it's all about the moment. It's all about what he wanted and what he wants right now. Thank you, Lewis. So for all of us, there is an appetite, or there are appetites in all of us that if they go unmanaged, if they go ignored, have the potential to rule us and keep us from seeing clearly. Sometimes the reason we can't see clearly is because our appetites are so big. One of the things I love that Larry said one of the times he was speaking here, he said, there should be nothing, you should not be bound or controlled by anything. You should be free. There should be no food that controls you. There should be no amount of money that controls you. No amount of space no person should have so much control of you that they dictate whether or not you are happy. Your joy should come from the Lord. Your fulfillment should come from the Lord. Your peace should come from the Lord, not from people, not from things. But we are so close to our appetites that we cannot see. Judas gained 30 pieces of silver and lost Jesus. He gained something. But then as he backs up and he realized how insignificant those 30 pieces of silver compared to what he has just given up is foolishness. But in the moment, 30 pieces of silver is going to meet my needs. In the moment, 30 pieces of silver is going to give me what I want. It's going to give me what I need. When we barter rather than surrender to God, we are responsible for the outcome of our own journey. When we decide to negotiate with God and say, God, I will do this if you do this, well, we are now responsible for how that whole thing turns out, rather than if we surrender and we say, well, God, do it your way. Lead me in the way I should go. Show me how to love as you love. Now God is responsible for the outcome of the journey. When Judas couldn't get Jesus to do his bidding, Judas traded his relationship for some silver. We do the same like Judas. It immediately begins to diminish in value the moment we get some clarity. Like Judas, the moment you make that trade, the value of the thing you receive begins to diminish. What are you tempted to trade yours for? Your relationship. Is it acceptance? Is it control? Is it peace? Is it security? Is it companionship? The safest and most secure and most purpose-filled place in the world that you could be is in the center of God's will for your life. And that doesn't happen when you control the situation and create God's will for your life. It happens when you let go and you say, God, have your way. It might not be what I had envisioned for my life. It might not be happening in the order I thought it was going to happen. It might not happen with the group of people that I thought it was going to happen with. But here I am. I surrender control. Let me do it your way. You're the author. You're the perfecter of our faith. You have the whole world in the palm of your hand. There is nobody like you. What is man, God, that you think of me, that you are mindful of me, that you've created a plan for my life? I choose to trust you instead. Let's stand. I want to pray for you today. What a thought, right? A thought that God would have a scheme, a plan, and we get so in a hurry that we want to make things move and make things work, and we try to control. I think it's just better that we just let go. So that's my prayer for you today. That no matter how you envision it to be, your next 3, 4, 5 steps, your next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you may have envisioned something when you first started to follow, and it may not be looking the way you thought it was going to look. But I'm here to tell you today that God's plans are God's plans, and He's sovereign, and you're better off in His place where He wants you than trying to control and manipulate situations and get yourself into things that you have no business getting into. I pray God's peace over your life. I pray for clarity. I pray for a realistic picture of the love of God, the love that God has for you, a love that melts fear, insecurities, a love that melts selfishness, a love that, as the Bible says, covers a multitude of sin. Is that kind of love that God has for you? My prayer for you today is that you would grow in your faith and your trust. and be able to just let go. In whatever area God's challenging you to let go today. Heavenly Father, we thank you. I thank you for the group that's here today, a group that chooses to trust you, a group that chooses to take one more step, even though they can't see the rest of the way. Thank you that your word is lamp to our feet and light unto our path. We speak your peace, peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that's bigger than the situation, a peace and a trust that says all things will work together for the good. And I choose to trust you, God. We live in that peace. We step out of here in that peace, and we choose to trust you today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Let's give God a praise. Amen. Guys, I love you. Thank you for coming today. Looking forward for Easter next week. Bring a friend, bring your family. We'll see you. If you can stay for a few minutes and help us break down, great. If not, have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday. God bless.